On Christmas Eve of 1945, a fire ripped through the Sodder family home. By morning, the house had vanished, and so had 5 of their children. But this wasn't a straightforward tragedy. It was the start of a lifelong quest for answers, all driven by a single haunting question. If they didn't die in the fire, what happened to the Sodder children? This is the story of a family's unbreakable will, and a mystery that, to this day, remains one of America's most chilling unsolved cases. For the better part of 40 years, on a winding road in West Virginia, a billboard stood against the Appalachian hills. It wasn't selling cars or soda, it was asking a question. On its weathered face were the black and white photos of 5 children, their eyes staring out at the endless stream of passing cars. Their names were Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. Below their faces, a reward was offered for any information that could solve the mystery of what happened to them. For the parents who put it there, it was more than just a sign. It was a declaration of hope that refused to die. A hope that their children didn't perish in a fire, but were out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. Before the fire, before the billboard, before their name became tied to a national mystery, the Sodders were living a version of the American dream in the small coal mining town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. George Sodder, born Giorgio Soddu in Italy in 1895, had come to the United States when he was just 13. He landed at Ellis Island with an older brother who, for reasons nobody quite remembers, immediately got back on a boat to Italy, leaving young George to make his way alone. But George was a hard worker. He found jobs on the railroads in Pennsylvania and eventually settled in West Virginia, where he started his own successful trucking company hauling dirt and coal. He became a respected, if sometimes controversial, member of the community. George had strong opinions, especially his criticism of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, which caused some tension within Fayetteville's Italian immigrant population. It was in West Virginia that he met and married Jenny Cipriani, another Italian immigrant. Together, they built a large, bustling family with 10 children in all, and settled into a big 2-story timber house just outside of town. By all accounts, the Sodders were a happy, thriving family. Their home was loud and full of life with their children, John, Joe, who was away serving in the Army, Marion, George Jr., Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty, and the youngest, Sylvia. Their life was built on routine and stability. George was known for his work ethic, and Jenny for her dedication to her home and children. The older kids helped look after the younger ones, and their days were filled with hard work, family dinners, and community life. They were a fixture in Fayetteville, a family that showed what perseverance could build. No one could have imagined that this picture of domestic happiness was about to be utterly destroyed, leaving behind a hole that would consume them for the rest of their lives. The events leading up to Christmas 1945 wouldn't just destroy their house. They would plant the first seeds of doubt that what happened was no accident. Christmas Eve of 1945 started out festively at the Sodder house. Marion, the eldest daughter at home, had brought gifts for her younger sisters from her job at a dime store. The kids were so excited they begged their mother, Jenny, to let them stay up late, and she agreed. As the night went on, the older boys, Maurice and Louis, were still up doing chores. Jenny, George, and their 4 oldest children at home eventually went to bed, leaving Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty awake, enjoying the glow of the Christmas lights. The first strange thing happened around 12:30 a.m. The phone rang, waking Jenny. She went downstairs to find a woman on the line whose voice she didn't know, asking for a man she'd never heard of. Jenny said she had the wrong number and hung up. On her way back to bed, she noticed that the lights were still on and the curtains were wide open, which was odd. She figured the kids forgot in all the excitement, so she turned off the lights, shut the curtains, and went back to sleep. Around 1 a.m., she was woken up again, this time by a loud bang on the roof, followed by a rolling sound. She thought little of it and drifted off. Just 30 minutes later, around 1:30 a.m., she woke for a third time, this time to the smell of smoke. Her office was on fire. the house filled with thick black smoke as panic took over. Jenny woke George, and they both started screaming for the children. They, along with 4 of their kids, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., scrambled to get out. But the 5 children who'd stayed up late were trapped in their attic bedrooms. The staircase was already a wall of fire. Frantic, George raced outside. He planned to use his heavy ladder to get to the attic window and save his children. But the ladder, which he always kept propped against the side of the house, was gone. It hadn't just fallen over. It had vanished. Not giving up, George had another idea. He'd pull one of his work trucks up to the house and climb on it to reach the window. He ran to his trucks, but neither of them would start. Both engines, which had worked perfectly just the day before, were dead. Meanwhile, Marion ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department, but the phone line wasn't working. A neighbor later admitted to cutting the line while trying to steal a block and tackle from the property, but he insisted he had nothing to do with the fire. This explanation never felt right to the family. Why was someone stealing from their property in the middle of the night? And was it just a terrible coincidence that it happened on the very night their house burned to the ground? With no way to call for help and no way to reach the attic, the rest of the Sodder family could only watch in horror as their home was consumed by the flames. The fire department, located only 2.5 miles down the road, didn't arrive until 8 a.m., more than 6 hours after the fire started. By then, nothing was left but a smoking, ash-filled cellar. Maurice, Martha, Louise, Jenny, and Betty were gone. On Christmas morning, the Sodders' world was in ruins. The official story came together quickly. Fire Chief F.J. Morris, who arrived late, gave the rubble a quick 2-hour look-over and declared that the 5 children had tragically died in the fire. He concluded the blaze was so intense it had cremated their bodies, leaving nothing behind. The cause of the fire was ruled as faulty wiring. Just 5 days later, on December 30th, 5 death certificates were issued. As far as the authorities were concerned, the case was closed. For George and Jenny Sodder, however, the nightmare was just starting, and the official story was full of holes. George immediately questioned the faulty wiring theory. He'd recently had the whole house rewired and inspected, and it had been declared safe. Besides, if an electrical issue started the fire, why did the Christmas lights stay on while the house began to burn? And then there was the most painful question of all. Where were the bodies? Jenny just couldn't accept that a house fire could have completely destroyed every bone of her 5 children. She started her own grim experiments, burning animal bones in the yard to see if they'd turn to ash. They never did. Her mother's intuition was soon backed by professionals. She called a local crematorium and was told that human bones are left behind even after being burned at 2,000 degrees for 2 hours, a fire far hotter and longer than the one at their home. The family's doubts just kept growing. They wondered why no one had heard the children scream for help. Jenny remembered the loud thud on the roof, and later, her sons found a small, hard, rubber object that looked like a pineapple bomb, a type of incendiary device, the missing ladder, the stalled trucks, the cut phone line. It all felt less like a string of bad luck and more like a carefully planned attack. It seemed like every possible way to save the children had been blocked. 2 years after the fire, a bizarre and disturbing event confirmed their fears. The Sodders learned that Fire Chief Morris had supposedly found something in the ashes, a box containing what he claimed was a human heart. He told George he had buried it there. George, furious, had the spot dug up. The box didn't contain a human heart. It contained fresh beef liver that had never been touched by fire. The rumor was that Morris put it there, hoping that finding remains would finally quiet the grieving family. This lie confirmed the Sodders' deepest fear. This wasn't an accident, it was a cover-up. The children hadn't died, they had been taken, and with that horrifying thought, their grief turned into a lifelong mission to find the truth. Convinced their children were still alive, George and Jenny Sodder spent the rest of their lives looking for them. They refused to believe the official story and started a search that would last for decades. Their first move was to challenge the official findings. In 1947, George hired someone to bulldoze the site of their home and sift through the dirt for any evidence. The search turned up a few small bone fragments. They sent them to the Smithsonian Institution for analysis. The report that came back was stunning. The bones were human vertebrae from a person aged 16 or 17. None of the missing children were that old. Maurice, the oldest, was only 14. The report also noted the bones showed no signs of being in a fire, suggesting they were probably in the dirt George had used to fill the basement, perhaps from a nearby cemetery. For the Sodders, this was proof. No remains of their children were ever in the ashes of their home. They poured their life savings into the search. They printed thousands of flyers with their children's pictures and offered a $5,000 reward, which they later doubled to $10,000, a huge amount of money in the 1950s. They traveled all over the country, chasing down every single lead, no matter how small. Their investigation also started to uncover some sinister possibilities. George's loud criticisms of Mussolini had made him enemies. He remembered a life insurance salesman who, after being turned away, warned him that his house is going to go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. Another time, a stranger looking for work pointed at their fuse boxes and said they would cause a fire someday. At the time, George brushed them off as empty threats, but now they felt like dark warnings. The family began to believe the Sicilian mafia might have been involved, maybe to get back at George for his politics or to extort money from him. Tips started coming in from all over. A hotel owner in Charleston claimed she saw 4 of the 5 children about a week after the fire. She said they showed up late at night with 2 men and 2 women of Italian extraction who seemed very guarded. Another sighting came from a woman in St. Louis who was sure she'd seen Martha in a convent. George investigated every lead, but they all went cold. They begged the FBI to open an interstate kidnapping case, but the agency dropped it after a couple of years, saying there wasn't enough evidence. It felt like every door was being slammed in their faces, but George and Jenny refused to give up. If the authorities wouldn't help, they would find another way to keep the search going. In 1952, George and Jenny decided they needed a permanent public plea for help. On their own property, right alongside State Route 16, a busy road running through Fayetteville, they put up a huge billboard. It was a stark and haunting sight. Against the plain backdrop were the individual photos of their 5 missing children. Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5. Their young faces, frozen in time, stared out at everyone who drove by. Below the photos, the billboard laid out the $10,000 reward and the family's own unwavering belief. What was their fate? Kidnapped, murdered, or are they still alive? It was a direct challenge to the official story and a public declaration that they would never believe their children died in the fire. The billboard became a local landmark, a constant reminder of the town's greatest mystery. For 37 years, it stood as a monument to the family's unending grief and hope. It was a silent witness on the side of the road, telling the Sodder story to a new generation of travelers. Kids who grew up in Fayetteville all knew the story of the Sodder children. The billboard was just part of the landscape. The family never rebuilt their house. Instead, they turned the site into a memorial garden for their lost children. The garden was a quiet place of remembrance, while the billboard was a loud, desperate cry for justice. For the rest of her life, Jenny wore black in mourning and tended to the garden where her home used to be. The billboard was an extension of her vigil, a symbol of a mother who would never, ever give up. It represented a family trapped by uncertainty, unable to properly mourn and unable to move on. It searched for answers for them year after year, a heartbreaking display of a family's undying hope. As years turned into decades, the trail went cold, but strange clues would still pop up, feeding the Sodders hope. The most mystifying clue of all arrived in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire. An envelope postmarked from Central City, Kentucky, was addressed to Jenny. Inside was a photo of a young man in his mid to late 20s. He had dark, curly hair, a serious expression, and looked strikingly like their son Louis, who would have been about that age. On the back of the photo was a cryptic handwritten message, Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie, Elil Boys, a 90132 or 35 inches. The message made no sense. They didn't know anyone named Frankie. The other words and numbers were a complete mystery, but the picture was powerful. For George and Jenny, this was the proof they had been waiting for. This was their son, alive. They immediately hired a private detective to go to Kentucky and figure out where the letter came from, but the detective took their money and was never seen again. Worried that making the message public might put Louis in danger, the Sodders made a tough decision. They updated the billboard, adding a large version of the photo of the man they believed was their son, but kept the other details to themselves. The new billboard was a painful sight, showing the children as they were in 1945 and one as he might have looked in 1967. The original photo was hung over their fireplace, a constant source of both hope and pain. Other leads continued to trickle in over the years. A woman in Houston claimed she overheard two men in a bar confessing to being Louis and Maurice Sodder. George and his son-in-law drove all the way to Texas to confront them, but the men denied everything. Was it just a cruel joke, or were they lying to protect themselves? Each new tip was a double-edged sword. It would reignite their hope, only to be followed by crushing disappointment. It's like hitting a rock wall, George once told a newspaper. We can't go any further. He was haunted by the idea that his children, if they were out there, might be too scared to get in touch. The identity of the young man in the photo has never been confirmed. Was it a heartless prank, or was it a real, desperate message from a lost son, trying to reach out across decades of silence and fear? For the Sodders, it was enough to keep believing. The relentless search for their children defined the rest of George and Jenny Sodder's lives. George passed away in 1969, never finding out what happened to his 5 children. He died believing they had been kidnapped and were still alive. Jenny, the rock of the family, kept the search going. She continued to wear black every day and took care of the memorial garden until she died in 1989. After Jenny's death, the surviving children made the painful choice to take the weathered billboard down. Its nearly 40-year watch was finally over. The physical landmark was gone, but the mystery was passed down to the next generation. The surviving Sodder children, and later their own kids, continued to talk about the case and looked into leads. The one exception was John, who rarely spoke of the fire, believing his siblings had died and the family should try to move on. But for the others, especially the youngest Sylvia, the search was a promise to their parents. Sylvia was only 2 years old the night of the fire. It was her earliest memory. She spent her life haunted by that tragedy and firmly believed her siblings survived. Her daughter once said, she promised me that she wouldn't let the story die, that she would do everything she could. Sylvia Sodder Paxton, the last sibling who was in the house that night, passed away in 2021. With her death, the last direct link to that night was gone. Anyone who truly knew what happened on Christmas Eve of 1945 is almost certainly gone now, and the chances of a deathbed confession have all but faded away. The Sodder children's disappearance is a case full of strange coincidences, questionable investigations, and hints of something sinister. The theories are endless: a mafia kidnapping in revenge for George's anti-fascist views, a planned abduction by someone who knew the family's routine, or maybe the children were taken by someone who knew the fire was about to be set. The mystery lives on because none of the official answers ever added up. What do you think happened? Was it a terrible accident made worse by a botched investigation? Or was it a dark plot that let 5 children disappear into the night? Let us know what you think in the comments. Today, the site of the Sodder home is just a grassy patch of land, the memorial garden still cared for by a family that has never found closure. The billboard is gone, but the story it told for so long has become a chilling piece of American folklore. It's the story of 5 children who vanished from a burning house without a trace, and of the parents who used a billboard to search for them for nearly a lifetime. The fate of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty Sodder remains one of the most profound and heartbreaking unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Their case may be cold, but the questions it raises still burn, a powerful testament to a family's love, their endless search for answers, and the haunting fact that sometimes the truth is lost forever in the smoke.